everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here with you all, and many thanks to the VACO team. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Deborah Cox, and I'm the Legislative Director at the National Association of Counties, located in Washington. If any of you are ever in DC and need an office space or somewhere to make some calls, feel free to stop by and we can help you with whatever you need. We're located right near the Senate side near Union Station, so it's pretty convenient. But today, before we get into some of the legislative issues facing counties today, just wanted to provide a little bit of economic and political context into all that's occurring right now. Unemployment, as we know, has been dropping the last few years and months, but it still remains at relatively high rates. Our budget deficit continues to hit record highs. Actually, the last 5 years in a row, the deficit has topped over $1 trillion each year. This year, however, the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, has said that our deficit will come in around $490 billion, which is much better than that $1 trillion mark. Right now, the federal debt held by the public is about 73% of our annual output, or gross domestic product, which is actually higher rate at any point in U.S. history except around World War II. But while the latest projections show that the deficit is decreasing, those long-term projections continue to go upward. And as we know, there's been a lot of talk about grand bargains and comprehensive tax reform and entitlement reform, which have not occurred, but without major action by Congress, our debt will continue to skyrocket. Right now, our overall debt is capped at about $17.6 trillion. There's been much debate on whether that cap should be raised or how we're going to cut spending. Right now, that current debt ceiling has been suspended until March of 2015. So that whole debate's going to come up again early next spring. Why is our debt continuing to skyrocket? For obvious reasons, most obviously mandatory spending and entitlements, and also increasing healthcare costs. But it's interesting, they haven't been able to do these grand bargains and major tax reform, entitlement reform, because of the increasing polarization that we see in Congress. I thought this chart by the National Journal was really interesting, in case you haven't seen it. That shows that in the 1980s, Republicans and Democrats often voted together, and then you fast forward up to today, and you see the extreme polarization. This chart was based on the roll call votes that National Journal compiled. And due to that polarization, the number of bills that Congress has enacted over the last several sessions has continued to decrease as it's become harder to push major legislation through Congress. And the 113th Congress, where we currently are in, is on track to be the least productive since World War II. And no surprise, you guys read the polls on a daily basis. Congressional approval rating continues to be at the lowest levels in history, around 8 to 13% approval rating on a good day. But it is interesting to note that a lot of the polling, this one's particular, I think from Gallup, that folks generally like their members of Congress, even though they don't like Congress, the body as a whole. So that's an interesting dynamic. Also interesting to note that more and more people are describing themselves and categorizing themselves as independents versus with Democrats or Republicans. So what is the outlook as we turn towards these midterm November elections? Well, in the Senate, there are 36 seats up for re-election. 21 of them are Democrats, the rest are for Republicans. In the Senate, Republicans would need to pick up 6 seats to regain the majority. In the House, all 435 seats are up. In order to take the majority, Democrats would need to pick up 19 seats in addition to the 199 that they already hold. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with all of the elections. How many of you are up for election? Anybody?
We don't have elections.
Oh, you're not this year? Okay. Thank you. All right, many of you might not know, but there are over 30 representatives on a lot of federal boards, everything from Department of Justice to FEMA to correctional health care. And we have had some pretty good wins this year, even though there haven't been a large number of measures that have moved through. We are very pleased that earlier this year, Congress was able to enact a 5-year Farm Bill reauthorization that authorized a lot of the USDA rural development programs. How many of you all have PILT counties that you receive payment in lieu of taxes funding from the federal government? We were pleased that PILT was included to the Farm Bill at about $425 million for this year. We do continue to look for funding, a funding vehicle this year for FY15 funding. It was interesting to see the appropriators in the House have provided funding in one of their bills for PILT for next year. So we'll see what happens later on this year with a continuing resolution or an omnibus appropriations package. We did have a small win in the Farm Bill regarding forest roads. They were about to be subject to more burdensome and costly federal restrictions, but we were able to keep that out. How many of you tracked the flood insurance bill that was moving earlier this year? Well, if you haven't, you should. There are of the 3,069 counties, about 2,900 counties across the country have federally subsidized policies in your county. And what happened was in 2012, there was a measure called Bigger Waters that wanted to address the fiscal solvency of the National Flood Insurance Program that is about $24 billion in debt. However, so the piece of legislation was well-intentioned, but when it went into effect, folks across the country that had federally subsidized policies were seeing these dramatic increases in their rates, some of them as high as 1,000%. People were sending us from across the country their insurance bills. One example was from St. Petersburg, Florida, where there was a house that was worth about $100,000 or $200,000. Their insurance rate for the year was typically around $1,000. Their new price was going to be $40,000 for a house that was worth $120,000, $200,000. So we've seen these examples, these crazy examples from across the country, not just the East, but also the West, the North, all over. So we were very pleased to see that this bill was moved into law and addresses not only the fiscal solvency of the National Flood Insurance Program, which is very important, but also takes a little bit more care of the homeowners, and there are some more protections in there for these fees. We have had some regulatory wins. You would be surprised at all the crazy things that they're thinking about doing, but one is counties were going to have to get rid of all of the fire hydrants if you own them under EPA's Safe Drinking Water Act. And you are also going to have to get rid of your entire stockpiles of fire hydrants. So glad that did go through. County volunteers are now exempt from the Affordable Care Act's employer mandate. We were pleased to see that. The U.S. Department of Treasury came out with a ruling just a few months ago. We've also had a ton of county officials testifying before various committees in Washington, all as part of our efforts to educate Congress and the congressional staff on what counties do and why counties matter. We've testified on everything like disaster mitigation, energy production, transportation. Supervisor Collins was just with us a few weeks ago testifying before the Senate Banking Committee on economic resiliency, so we were very proud of her and she did a great job. So there are, moving into fall, some definite, very serious challenges and threats that continue to face counties that our team in DC is working on. One being the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill and the solvency of the Highway Trust Fund, which funds the programs that are authorized through MAP 21. As you all are aware, right before we went on the congressional August recess, they did pass a short-term fix to both the Highway Trust Fund and a temporary extension of MAP 21 that will take us into March of next year. So stay tuned, that fight will come around again. We have done some significant research on the role that counties play in transportation infrastructure. know that some of the counties in Virginia don't do as much or don't own as much roads and bridges as perhaps some others across the country. But we've been particularly looking at how counties fund and finance a lot of their transportation infrastructure projects, and particularly as it relates to MAP 21 reauthorization. When we ran the numbers, due to a lot of the consolidations that had occurred and eliminations of programs under MAP 21, we found that funding for county-owned roads and bridges nationally was decreased about 30%. So we're trying to right that in a new bill. Tax reform, not going anywhere this year, but negotiations do continue to occur behind the scenes, particularly at a staff level. Obviously, they were hoping to get tax reform done this year. Chairman Baucus in the Senate, the chairman of the Finance Committee, retired and he became the new ambassador to China. So there's a new chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, a gentleman named Mr. Wyden from Oregon. Not the most county-friendly or local government-friendly. And then in the House, Chairman Camp of the Ways and Means Committee has announced his retirement. So you have a new chair of the Senate Finance Committee, a retiring chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. It's really unclear about how quickly a tax reform measure could move. Now, if Republicans are able to take the Senate, that potentially increases the chances. And we particularly care about tax reform. As you know, we've been beating the drum on tax-exempt municipal bonds and the threats facing those. Leading all the way back to the 2010 Simpson-Bowles Commission, there have been many proposals in the last few years that would hurt county and local government ability to finance and issue tax-exempt municipal bonds. What do we use those primarily for? Well, in our last study, we found out the primary purpose was for schools, hospitals, roads, and bridges. So if we don't have that tool, or if it's the tax interest earned is capped, we're definitely going to have some problems. Now, the President's budget every year, the last few years, has included language that would cap the interest earned on tax-exempt municipal bonds. So we continue to work really closely with the administration to see if they might be willing to change that in their next budget request that comes out from the President each year. The House, Chairman Camp that I just mentioned, he issued a 900-page discussion draft earlier this year about what he would like to see for tax reform, and it also included that language that was hurt, that would not be helpful to us. So keep banging the drum on tax-exempt municipal bonds, even though tax reform isn't going anywhere quickly, it looks like. We still need to be educating our members and their staff on why muni bonds are important to counties. Waters of the U.S. How many of you are tracking this? All right, so for those of you who are not familiar with this, the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers a few months ago released a new proposed rule that would regulate waters and potentially add more waters that are under federal jurisdiction. NACO, we obviously would like to keep our waters and air and environment clean, but we do have a lot of concerns about the definitions that are included in this new rule, what types of ditches and other water bodies would be under new federal rules and regulations. The comment period to file comments to EPA ends October 20th, so if your county has concerns, please submit comments by October 20th or 21st. We've, at NACO, created an information hub that has draft comments, op-eds, letters to members of Congress that you can use right there on our website. So we encourage you to, again, submit comments. Some of the other upcoming issues that we're facing, appropriations. As you know, we've had some scares with federal government shutdowns and that over the last few years. This year, the current fiscal year will expire at the end of September, and the appropriators have not finished their work. Congress has not finished their work. The House is a little bit further along than the Senate. They've passed, through the full House, 6 of the 12 annual appropriations bills. The Senate, on the other hand, has passed none. So because that is the case, we're most likely to see a continuing resolution passed when Congress comes back in just a few weeks from the August recess. Now, once we get it is up in the air about how long that continuing resolution will last to get us through the November elections, most likely into December. And at that point, they can either choose to do another continuing resolution, or what the appropriations staff are working on right now is drafting an omnibus package, which is where you combine all the 12 annual appropriations bills into one huge measure and push it through. So we'll continue to monitor what happens to the annual appropriations process, tracking a lot of the issues and funding levels for programs that impact counties. Marketplace Fairness Act hope is not yet dead. As you recall, last year the Senate passed a very bipartisan Marketplace Fairness Act bill, and it's been stuck in the House Judiciary Committee. Chairman Bob Goodlatte has not really wanted to address this issue before the November elections. Not that he's completely opposed to it, but so now that the Senate's passed it, they're taking a look at how they can put pressure on the House to move the bill. So we have Marketplace Fairness Act. There's another bill called the Internet Tax Freedom Act, ITFA, that expires at the end of November of this year, tax on the internet. Well, what the Senate is looking at doing is combining the Marketplace Fairness Act bill that they already passed with this Internet Tax Freedom Act, and then punting it back to the House. The House has passed the Internet Tax Freedom Act. They want the internet to be tax-free for forever. We have concerns about that, not that we want to tax the internet, but for county interests, as the internet has grown, things like TV, music are being bought and sold over the internet, and so from a county perspective, that we don't want any prohibitions against doing that if the local governments choose. So the Senate, potentially when they come back in September, in the next few weeks, is going to try to push this combined measure of Marketplace Fairness Act and a Internet Tax Freedom bill that is not a permanent moratorium, but just a 10-year moratorium that would prohibit state and local governments from taxing the internet for 10 years. So we'll see how that does. They were going to move that potentially before the August recess, but they could choose to address it in the next few weeks, or wait and see if they have enough votes and do that after the November election. So again, hope is not dead for Marketplace Fairness Act. I mentioned PILT SRS funding, PILT payment move taxes, SRS secure rural schools for forest counties. Again, looking at any vehicle that moves and looking at the appropriations process for that funding. Immigration reform, pretty much dead, but we do continue to talk with members of Congress and their staff about why counties care about immigration reform. Well, because of the justice costs involved, the education cost, the health care cost in the county hospitals. So we want them to be aware of the role that counties play. And also, if counties are going to be responsible to take care of some of these individuals, what are those costs, and how can the federal government help us with some of that? So that's pretty much it. We have a whole bunch of resources that you can look at. We're happy to answer any of your questions. Our team in DC is working very hard on behalf of county issues, and please don't hesitate to call us anytime. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I hope you have enjoyed the morning. We have a wonderful lunch for you in the bistro that everybody is invited to attend. And a couple things, there's a pair of Ray-Ban sunglasses at the registration desk, so if you came with some and don't have them, please go